For the first part is the founding fathers of Neo-Realism, who is Kenneth Waltz. In 1959, Kenneth Waltz introduced the three images framework in his book titled Man, the State and War. This framework explains the causes of war through three different levels of analysis. The first image is the individual level, which war is caused by human nature, leaders' personalities, emotions, ambitions, or misjudgment. The focus is the individual decision maker. For example, a leader becoming aggressive or making poor decisions that trigger conflicts. The second image is the state level. War happens because of internal characteristics of states, such as political systems, economic conditions, nationalism, or domestic instability. The focus is the structure and nature of a country itself. For example, an authoritarian government using war to strengthen domestic support. The third image is the international system level. War occurs because the international system is anarchic. Where there is no world government, states must protect themselves, and the competition for security creates conflicts. And the focus is the global system and relations between states. For example, countries building military power because they fear threats from the others. This becomes the foundation for what's later in theory of Neo-Realism, or even known as structural realism. The main contribution of Waltz argued that while individuals and states matter, the international system is the most important cause of recurring wars. These are core components which together form the foundation of Neo-Realism, which is also known as structural realism in international relations. The first one is the structure of the international system. Neo-Realism posits that international politics can only be understood by examining the overarching systems rather than individual states. This structure is defined by an anarchic ordering principle, functional sameness of states, and a changing distribution of material capabilities or polarity. This is stated by Harrison in 2002. The blueprint: states operate in a decentralized anarchic environment where they are forced to use a mechanism of self-help to ensure survival, which serves as their primary goal. The second one is the balance of power theory. Because the international system is a self-help environment, states constantly monitor the distribution of capabilities to ensure no single nation achieves total hegemony. The mechanism states maintain systematic equilibrium via internal balancing, building domestic, economic, and military power, or even external balancing, which forming strategic alliances to counter a rising superpower. Neo-realist framework states that balancing is always preferred over bandwagoning, aligning with a threat, because the bandwagoning leaves a state dangerously vulnerable to the hegemon's whims. The third one is the security dilemma. First extensively analyzed by Robert Jervis, the security dilemma is a structural trap embedded in anarchy where a state's defensive actions are perceived as offensive threat by its neighbors. The spiral effect operating under systematic uncertainty, state B responds to state A's defensive military to build up by counter-arming, and ultimately this competitive spiral leaves both states spending massive resources only to end up less secure than before, proving that conflicts can emerge without any genuine offensive intent. The last one is the variance of Neo-Realism. While structural realists agrees that anarchy should shape world politics, they diverge into three primary schools regarding how states calculate survival. The first one is defensive realism. Pioneered by Kenneth Waltz, this school views states as a security maximizers. It argues the international system rewards status quo behavior because amassing excessive power triggers aggressive counterbalancing coalitions, which ultimately decreases the aggressor's security. The second one is the offensive realism. Articulated by John Measurements, this school views states as power maximizers, and it argues that pervasive uncertainty regarding future intentions forces states to pursue absolute relative power, making regional hegemony the only reliable guarantee of long-term survival. The third one is neo-classical realism. Coined by Gideon Rose, this framework synthesizes system-level and unit-level analysis, and it argues that while structural pressures dictate the parameters of foreign policy, actual decisions are mediated through domestic intervening variables, state.
Next, let's look at the first and perhaps most fundamental factors of neo-realism, which is the anarchic structure of the international system. When we talk about anarchy in common language, we often think of riots or total chaos. However, in international relation theory, specifically neo-realism, anarchy has a very specific structural meaning. According to Kenneth Waltz pointed out in his 1979 work, which is Theory of International Politics, anarchy simply means the absence of a central governing authority. Because there is no global police force to protect them, states find themselves in a self-help system. This means that every country must ultimately rely on its own resources and capabilities to ensure its own security and survival. A more current example of the anarchic structure can be seen in the South China Dispute. We have multiple sovereign states like China, Vietnam, and the Philippines, and also Malaysia claiming the same territories. For the second factor of neo-realism, which is distributions of power and polarity. In international relations, this refers to how military, economic and political power is spread among different states. According to the theory of neo-realism, this is very important for three reasons. First, there is no central authority in the world which we call anarchy. Second, because of this, the structure of the system depends on how power is distributed. Last, these distributions affects how states behave, whether they compete, balance each other, or form alliances. Now, let's look at how we categorize this power structure. There are three types of polarity. First, we have unipolarity, which is one power. One single country is so strong that no other country can challenge it. For example, after the Cold War ended in 1991, the United States becomes the only global superpower. They had the strongest economy and military in the world. Second, bipolarity, which is two power. The world is split into two sides, led by two major rivals. For example, during the Cold War, the world was divided between the USA and the Soviet Union. Most countries had to choose a side. Last is multipolarity, which is many power. Power is shared among three or more major nations. This is often seen as the most complex or unstable system. For example, according to the Neo-Realism 2001, during the Europe before World War I, you had Great Britain, Germany, France, Russia and Austria-Hungary all competing for their power at the same time. Finally, the last factor of neo-realism is security dilemma. The security dilemma is a situation in international relations where one state increases its security. For example, by building more weapons or strengthening its military. Other states feel threatened and respond by doing the same, even if the first state only intended self-defense. This often leads to mutual distrust and arms competition. A perfect historical example of this occurred during the Cold War. Both the USA and the Soviet Union built massive nuclear arsenals. Each side claimed their weapons were strictly for defense. However, because both saw the other's action as a threat, it led to a dangerous and expensive arms race that lasted for decades.
My name is SYAFFIAH binti NAJIB. I will present about the impact of neo-realism to international relations. About the first impact is power competition among states. During the Cold War, the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union can be explained through neo-realism theory. According to Kenneth Wall, the bipolar structure of Cold War pushed both superpowers into constant competitions. This is why the United States and the Soviet Union were involved in long-term political, military and ideological rivalry after World War II. John J. Mearsheimer explained in Offensive Neo-Realism that great powers will always try to maximize their power through the nuclear arms race, the formation of military alliances such as NATO and the Warsaw Pact, as well as the struggle for global influence around the world. The Cold War also shows the concept of the security dilemma introduced by Robert Jervis. This means that when one country tries to increase its security, other countries may see it as a threat. As a result, both sides continue building military during the competing with each other. For the next impact is influence on foreign policy. States must prioritize their own survival and national security when making foreign policy decisions. For example, some small states choose to form alliances with powerful countries, remain neutral during conflicts, or adjust their diplomatic strategies according to changes in the balance of power. Since states cannot fully trust the intention of other countries, they adopt cautious and strategic foreign policy to protect their sovereignty and national interests. Balance of power happen, meaning there is no higher authority controlling states. To prevent dominations, states usually strengthen their military power or form alliances with other countries. This is because states feel that its powerful country could threaten their security and sovereignty. This situation continued even after the Cold War ended. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States became the most powerful country in the world. Although the world appeared unipolar, Kenneth Wall argued that other states would eventually try to balance against American dominance because no country is comfortable with one state having too much power. However, these alliances are not permanent because they are based on national interests and changing security needs. The balance of power changes. States may also change their alliances to face new threats. When states balance against stronger power, they reduce the possibility of hegemony and maintain equilibrium among major states. Balance of power, states form alliances and increase their capabilities to prevent any single countries from becoming too dominant in the international system.
And now we will be discussing the core advantages of neo-realisms in international relations. While classical realism often looks at human nature to explain conflict, neo-realism shifts our focus to the bigger picture. Specifically, we will look at three key strengths of this theory, which is it is focused on system structure, it is clear explanation of the balance of power, and its strong predictive capabilities in global politics. So, firstly, Neo-Realism shifts the analytical lens away from the individual leaders or domestic politics, which is it's focusing instead on the structure of the international system itself. According to foundational theories, Kenneth Waltz, 1985, the international system is inherently anarchic. This doesn't mean it's constant chaos, but rather that there is no higher central authority governing sovereign status. Because there is no global police force, states must prioritize their own survival and security. This systematic pressure forces countries to behave in similar, predictable way and making neo-realism a highly objective framework for analysis. For example, we can see this clearly during the Cold War. Despite having completely different ideologies and domestic political system, both the United States and the Soviet Union increased their military power and formed strategic alliances, as noted by John Lewis Geddes, 2005. This demonstrates that it was the bipolar structure of the international system rather than internal politics that dictated stated behavior. Next, our second major point is that neo-realism provides a highly logical framework to explain the balance of power clearly. As scholar Stephen M. Walt, 1985 highlights, countries form alliances precisely to maintain this balance. States do not necessarily cooperate out of the genuine goodwill. Instead, they cooperate to protect their own security and prevent any single dominant state from becoming a global hegemon. This perspective helps us understand why international cooperation happens even during times of intense conflict and global tensions. A prime historical and ongoing example of this is NATO, established in 1949. Western countries did not join forces casually. They united because they view the rising power of the Soviet Union as a major direct security threat. NATO was created to serve as a structural counterweight to balance Soviet power during the Cold War. Finally, neo-realism is incredibly valuable because of its strong predictive power in global politics. As argued by John Measurement 2001, the theory successfully predicts regular patterns of competitions and conflict between major powers. When one state grows stronger, neighboring or rival states naturally respond by boosting their own security to protect themselves. This dynamic creates what international relations theorists call a security dilemma, where one country's defensive actions are viewed as a threat by another, sparking a cycle of escalations. For example, we can see this theory playing out in real time today through the current rivalry between the United States and China in the Asia-Pacific region. As noted by Friedberg, 2005, both nations are continuously expanding their military strength and regional influence. This modern power struggle perfectly reflects neo-realism predictions, proving that the theory remains deeply relevant for explaining contemporary international conflicts. So, in conclusion, neo-realism is a valuable theory because it focuses on the global structure, explains why alliances form to balance power, and accurately predicts conflict between major nations.
In the world of international politics, theory tries to explain why the nations act the way they do. One of the famous is neo-realism. It tells us that states live in anarchy where survival and power is everything. But behind all this neat framework lies a problem. Neo-realism is often oversimplify reality. First, neo-realism is too much focused on the structure of the international system, especially the idea of anarchy. It assumes that states act mainly because of external pressure and power distribution. But in reality, countries are influenced by many other factors such as religion, leadership, culture, ideology, and domestic politics. For example, according to Kenneth Waltz, the main thinker of neo-realism, said that treat state as if they are all the same. And critics like Bear and Heath say this ignore the context. Take a Malaysian support for Palestine as example. It's just not about global power. It was also about belief values and domestic politics between Malaysians and Palestine. So neo-realism is oversimplified. Second, neo-realism puts too much attention on power and security. It assumes survival is the main goal and military strength is the key. This creates the security dilemma when one country build up its military and make other country feel threatened and will do the same. For example, Cold War arms race between United States and Union of Soviet Socialist Republic where each other side build nuclear weapons to feel secure and make other country fearful and escalating tensions. So focusing only military power misses other important aspects of survival, such as economic interdependence. Third, Neo-Realism ignores the role of idea and ideology. It mainly looks at material factors like military power, but belief, values, and identity also matter. For example, the Cold War wasn't just about power competition, it was also about ideology. Capitalism versus communism. Religion, nationalism, and political values often drive decisions. By ignoring this, Neo-realism gives us an incomplete picture of international relations. To sum up, Neo-realism focuses too much on structure. It pays too much attention to power and security, and it ignores the idea and ideology. So because of these weaknesses, Neo-realism cannot fully explain why countries act differently in similar situations. That's why we need other theories like liberalism or constructivism to get a more complete understanding of global politics.